Our next speaker, probably like me, heard of him when he was running for Congress in the 10th District recently. I don't like to think that's the most important thing to know about him, though. Arie Friedman is a combat veteran. He is a physician. And since the election, like me, he's been trying to do his best to advance the conservative cause. He's been, in this area, leading the fight against the Obamacare Health Care Reform Act. And he's going to tell us some more. He's going to tell us something about what that entails. Dr. Friedman?
I will say, just before I start, that one of the things I keep hearing is that conservatives aren't cool. iPad. My 19-year-old daughter's impressed, so I know we're on the right path. See how it works the first time I'm trying it. You know, the healthcare laws that have been passed are important not just because in the details, because the details are very damaging, very concerning, very worrisome to us all. I'll talk a little bit about them. But they're really important because they got chosen to be the first assault on American freedom for a reason. Your health care, your interactions with your doctor, your private secrets, the things that make you who you are so elemental to your personal freedom that it's obvious why they decided to take it on as one of their first tasks. The assault began not just with this last Obamacare law, it began with the stimulus, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think the way we approach this whole issue, not just of healthcare reform and what it means for us and how we stop it, but how we stop this whole movement we're being subjected to, and that's why I think it's particularly valuable to talk about it in this forum, is first and core concepts. Who we are as a people and why this rankles us so much. I don't need to repeat it, I don't need to make up my own speech. Back in 1926, Calvin Coolidge spoke on the subject of the 150th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And if you haven't read this speech, it's about 4 pages. It should be required reading for everybody who believes they're conservative or an American. And I'm just going to read a paragraph from it. About the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made great progress in 1776, that we've had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is fine. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is fine. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is fine. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward towards the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than those of the Revolutionary Fathers. The events of the past several months have resulted in some dramatic and transformative changes to our healthcare system. 3 laws: the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010, and the Health Education and Reconciliation Act of 2010. They represent real and enacted law. We live under them today. They're not bills, they're not plans, they're enacted laws. And the only thing we're dealing with is the timeline. How long does it take for the President and the administration to put in place the regulations and the individuals who will make this law real? If you look at the timelines, and there's several of them out there on the internet, when the major portions of these laws get enacted is anywhere between 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now. The farthest out any of the major changes occur is in 2018. If you think about that, to the kind of casual observation, that's a long time away. For me, some of my kids aren't even out of grade school at that point. So we're talking about things that are happening very quickly. And the next step in this is what I just mentioned, is that the Obama administration is now in the process of putting people in place who will make these things real. All of you have heard about Donald Berwick?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Donald Berwick is going to be, he now is, due to a recess appointment, the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I cannot overemphasize the importance of that organization. It sounds very bureaucratic. They set all rules for medical billing. They control all aspects of Medicare. They partner with the states in controlling essentially everything about Medicaid. And every single insurance plan and policy in this country functions by their direction. Even in things that aren't written down, they emulate what the government's doing. Let me give you a quote from Donald Berwick. This was a quote from a speech that he gave just a couple of years ago before a British organization about the British national healthcare system. And many of you have seen it. You could have protected the wealthy and the well, instead of recognizing that sick people tend to be poorer and poor people tend to be sicker. And that any healthcare funding plan that is just, equitable, civilized, and humane must redistribute wealth from the richer among us to the poor and less fortunate. Excellent healthcare is by definition redistribution. Britain, you chose well. So, for those of us who believed and argued before the healthcare law got passed that we were talking about a statist redistributive program, and we're called reactionary, we're called liars, we're called excitable. If we were wrong, why would he choose a man like this to run that institution? The healthcare czar for our country now believes that healthcare should be equitable and wealth should be redistributed through it as a result. There's another doctor out there I want you to be aware of. Anybody know the name David Blumenthal? Honestly, I find this guy more frightening. David Blumenthal holds the office of the National Coordinator of Health Information Technology. Now, one of the exciting things is when the liberals make these names so hard to get a hold of and kind of technological. He's the healthcare record czar. And there was recently an article about him that I read. And believe me, the absolute intent of all of these laws is to put your charts, your medical records, in an electronic form, connected to centralized databases, accessible through the government for government purposes, and distributed in any way they want for whatever reasons they want, with no regard to your personal privacy. He was asked straight out, what about things that are sensitive? HIV status, whether or not I've had an abortion, my drug rehab history, my psychiatric history. And he said, well, don't put it in the chart. And for those of us who are involved in healthcare, that's a pretty shocking story. So if I send a patient to a surgeon for an operation, the patient is sensitive about the fact that they have HIV and don't want to include in their chart, how do I let that surgeon know that they have to double glove before the procedure to protect themselves? How does that surgeon know to make sure they stay on their drugs? Because you miss a dose of your HIV medication, and you may very well find yourself in the increased viral load. What about psychiatric illnesses? I mean, none of these, the purpose of the patient chart originally, way back when, was to be a tool to care for you. Now it's a tool for anything but. In fact, the only way this guy can come up with to make sure that you're protected, your desires, your personal needs are cared for, if privacy is one of them, is to not use the chart at all. What a distortion. But it's, I have a little note to myself here, but it's unacceptable for the national security agencies to tape conversations between Americans and people in terrorist enclaves in Afghanistan.